Hi everyone, this is Miss Moriarty and I'm here to discuss with us our topic 6.10 to 6.12. Remember, we're going to continue discussing renewable energy sources. And as you watch the video, you want to make sure that you are taking down notes. So here in 6.10, this discusses a renewable energy source known as geothermal. Now, in geothermal energy, it's actually obtained by using the heat that's going to be stored in the Earth's interior, hence the name geothermal. And that is going to then heat up water, which is then brought to the surface as steam. That steam is then going to be used to drive an electric generator. And obviously, this is pretty much a pattern that we've seen throughout our Unit 6. Typically, electricity generation is going to be made in very similar ways using all different types of fuel sources. So if you see in the example picture here, we've got in the Earth's interior, here's the magma, there's the reservoir of water there. Here, that's going to then heat up that water. It's going to generate that steam there. That steam is going to turn a turbine of sorts, and then that's going to eventually turn that generator, which then moves to a transformer and eventually travels out to potential electric mains there. That water is then reused and it's cooled and condenses here, and it goes back to our cooling tower to then be reused for the same process over and over again. Now, the cost of accessing geothermal energy can potentially be expensive because it's not easily accessible in lots of parts of the world. So it's very key in its location. So geothermal as a renewable energy source may not be that common. Some of the cons behind this is the fact that it does release what's known as hydrogen sulfide, which potentially could be an air pollutant. And you can kind of see that in our advantages, disadvantages slides here. So with geothermal, we know it's an energy that's going to typically involve very low running costs because it's naturally heating up that water. We don't necessarily need any type of fuel source in order to actually heat it up. So the saves about 80% or so over fossil fuels. Its main advantage is that it doesn't create any real pollution that would contribute to global warming. So it doesn't produce things like carbon dioxide or carbon monoxide. Governments or various countries are investing in this type of renewable source, which can create more jobs in local economies. But remember, it's very localized in where we can find it. Over time, sites can run out of steam for a period of time, which could potentially cause lower electrical generation. Since it's not widely used amongst people, equipment, staff, and infrastructure may be limited. And like I said earlier, geothermal sites can contain poisonous gases like hydrogen sulfide that can escape deep within the earth, and it may harm potential constructors. Now, moving on to 6.11, this is discussing what's known as a hydrogen fuel cell, which is a really interesting renewable energy source. So hydrogen fuel cells are actually an alternate to non-renewable fuel sources. And we're going to mainly use hydrogen as the fuel here. And we do that by combining the hydrogen and oxygen in the air to then form water and release energy via electricity in that process. And so water ends up being the product. Now, hydrogen fuel cells have low environmental impacts and pretty much produce no carbon dioxide when the hydrogen is coming from water. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means in a second. The technology, however, can be quite expensive, and the energy needed to then create the hydrogen gas in the fuel source, there's a tremendous amount of energy that's required. So looking at the image over here, this is just a brief kind of overview as to how this could potentially work. So here in number 1, we have our hydrogen molecules are going to be split. Those hydrogen protons and electrons are wind up in that upper reaction layer there. Those protons are going to move across the membrane, and electrons take a potential alternate route. That's that electrical current there. Oxygen molecules, O2, are then split and combine with the protons and electrons from our hydrogen molecules to form our end product, which we know is water in that lower reaction layer. So this is a fantastic energy source, doesn't produce any carbon dioxide. It still produces electrical energy. However, it can be expensive and requires lots of energy to occur. Now remember, on the previous slide, I did say it's quite expensive to use this type of fuel source, and it requires lots of energy. And the reason is because to isolate and get that hydrogen gas is really, really difficult because it doesn't just naturally exist by itself. So you actually have to first separate the gas from either water, H2O, or sometimes we can even use CH4, which we know as methane. There's 2 main processes in which we can do that, and that is steam reforming. So we actually burn natural gas. We use the steam to then separate the hydrogen from the methane. But remember, when we do that, we're then producing carbon. Or we can use electrolysis, and that's going to send an electrical current into that water, breaking the oxygen and the hydrogens. So remember, this process takes a lot of energy. It can be quite expensive. Here are the pros and the cons kind of broken down for us. We know waste potentially can be pure water depending upon where we're getting it from. Ocean or fresh water can be used to form that hydrogen gas. We know it doesn't destroy wildlife, has a minimal environmental impact. The energy used to create the hydrogen may come from a solar power source, if we could implement that. Hydrogen can easily be transported through pipes and can be stored in compounds to make it safe. But remember the cons. It takes tremendous amounts of energy to produce the hydrogen from water or methane. Changing from fossil fuels to hydrogen fuel could be incredibly expensive and cost a lot of people their jobs. If not handled correctly, hydrogen gas can potentially be explosive. And currently, it's very difficult to store, especially for cars. All right, guys, here's a practice multiple choice based on our discussion here. And number 8, which of the following accurately describes a fuel cell vehicle? Take a second and pause the video, see if you can answer. Okay, at this point, you should have paused the video, and let's see if we got it correct. Okay, if you said C as the answer here, you would have been correct. Fuel cell vehicles use hydrogen to generate electricity that's going to run the motor. Now, guys, moving on to our very last topic of this video, and that's 6.12, that is wind energy. Now, when we talk about wind energy, oftentimes we're talking about the kinetic energy or movement of wind turbines that are being moved because of air. We know that those kinetic energy that forms due to the moving spin of that turbine converts that mechanical energy into eventually electricity. Now, an average turbine can power around 460 homes, has about 15 to 30% capacity. So that's its percentage of total possible energy it may generate. But it's only going to produce electricity in a range of about 8 to 55 mile an hour winds. That motorized drive within the shaft can then turn the turbine to face wind. We know wind energy is a renewable as well as a clean source of energy. One of the cons to it that people may not always think about is lots of migrating species such as birds or bats can potentially be killed off if they fly into the spinning blades. Some disadvantages of this energy source is the fact that it's clean, like we said. It can be cheap to supply. You don't have to pay that much money up front for it. Wind doesn't necessarily need a factory in order to be produced. It can be recycled. Some disadvantages. In the summer, there may not be as much wind as maybe the rest of the year. It can make a lot of noise. So in surrounding areas, lots of communities don't want wind turbines or wind farms because they can be noisy, does need lots of open space, and windmill farms are really only available in certain states. And I know this disadvantage is not necessarily on there, but I'm going to give you two more. Remember, it can also harm migratory species such as birds and bats. And another disadvantage that you wouldn't really think of is oftentimes people don't think they're aesthetically pleasing. So in the other communities that potentially may have wind turbines placed in their area, they don't tend to like them for the noise, and they just think they kind of look ugly. So make sure to add those disadvantages there. All right, guys, that's the end of our video. Make sure that you took notes, and please mark this